whole point that we've been trying to make all along is that founding something is different than managing something. And it's inherent that you guys kind of think about that as you're running your businesses, because most of you are founders and managers, right? And you're both, and they're two different particular aspects. Remember the founder we talked about, keeper of the company story. The idea is to found that story, make sure you're telling the story, and make sure everything in the company is in alignment with that story, right? That's where strong company cultures actually come from. So we did our exercise here. Remember, we're in part one. We kind of worked on this piece, but we're still on the idea today. We're actually going to be working on taking this kind of core idea that you've got and actually putting a form to it, because by making that choice, you actually determine many things, such as where you should be spending your time, the type of risk you'll be exposed to, and ultimately even the rewards you may even be applicable toward. So today we're going to look at that. We'll actually conclude by getting you starting on the homework, which is going to be starting to think about what your core company values actually are. Those 5 or 6 things that are extraordinarily important to you that you'd almost rather close the business over rather than violate. All right, the things that extend the company story out in terms of what it is you believe a little bit further. So when we get that done, we'll actually have that second part actually railed out. Then as next month, I think we get together, we'll practice that, writing our values with each other and get that down. And then we'll come back next month and actually try to turn those values actually into physical practices. So that's kind of where we're headed, just so everyone kind of has context again, since it's been a little while since we were there. So we've got our exercise here for today, and we'll have one worksheet here for this afternoon as well. One thing before we go on, I don't know if you saw this, but this was just on Nat Geo's website this week. And this was the headline for the story. But remember, we're always talking about all products tell a story and how important that story is. More important than the product itself many times. So here was the headline: Pro-environment light bulb labeling turns off conservatives, study finds. They actually took identical light bulbs and put them in stores, big box retailers and Home Depots all across the country as an experiment. And we put one in a package which just said light bulb, and the other one they touted up the pro-environment capabilities of the light bulb. Same light bulb, right? Different packaging. And the neat thing it is, when they got someone to go to the kiosk and get one, they would stop with their clipboards and say, hey, can I ask you a few questions? Your name, your age, right? They took gender down. And your political bias. Do you tend to be conservative? Thanks. Right? And they actually and then they began to notice these huge trends that conservatives actually reported, it kind of turned off with all the environmental stuff, right? And then when they really got down to it in the story they were talking about, it reminded conservatives of carbon credits, which they thought was a liberal agenda. And they attached the liberal agenda, bad feelings they had about that, back to the product, right? So you appreciate that the story you tell can actually attract certain types of customers, right? But also turn off other ones, and that's okay. But just think, there's a real powerful example. Remember we talked about, Mozart, the baby Einstein, things that we talked about. We talked about health bars that you take. Another great example, very mundane product, in this case, a light bulb. Same light bulb, 2 different responses by a different story that it actually told. So again, I'm always on the lookout for these mundane types of products that can actually, through the proper story, either influence or in some cases discourage certain customers from buying the product just by the story it tells, not by the product attributes in which it actually dispels. So interesting study you can find on National Geographic if you want to see the actual data behind it, but pretty interesting. So you actually have, as page 2 of your handouts, you've got something which will kind of be a summary of what I'm just about to do here right before lunch, which is about a form of doing business. All ideas have to be put into a form, unfortunately. At the end of the day, we would love to live in a pure world of abstraction, but all ideas have to actually get into some form. And whether you know it or not, there are only a few forms in business that really kind of exist, archetypes, if you will. And here's something scary. You've probably chosen one, and you may not even really thought about the choice. You may have just chosen it by default. But by doing that, a form of business dictates exactly what we said, where you're going to spend your time, how much risk you might be exposed to, whether or not you can go on vacation or not, right, as some of you know, based on where your business is. So we're going to walk through these various forms and talk a little bit about the pros and cons. So you can actually think of a form of a business like a genre to a story. right? So most story writers actually pick a genre, right? A love story, a drama, a period piece, a spaghetti western, right? And then they work within the constraints of that story. I mean, it's just good writing discipline. And you can stretch the constraints of the genre a bit, but you have to stay true at the end of the day, right? You can't have a love story where the guy doesn't get the girl in the end, right? That's not true to that genre. So any kind of form of business is the same way. The rules can be stretched, they can be bent, but you almost have to adhere to the underlying structure of that. And it determines for you as founders where you spend your time and what you need to think about. So I kind of think of it here. There's your company story, and you're now going to give it shape, or you're going to give it form. And there are two different ways you can have this. It can be a founder-dependent form of business, which means you are the company. In fact, you may be the only one in your company. And there may not be any employees, or it may be co-owners, but the owners are the business, and there's usually no employees. The rule here is if you leave and go on vacation, the business leaves and goes on vacation, right? There's no office humming back at the office, right? There may not even be any office. So there are two basic forms of what I call kind of a founder-dependent business. You've got the hustle business, which is the labor person, and you've got the other idea, which is the proprietary assets, which is the idea person. So these are two completely different kinds of businesses that have two different kind of ways of going about how they do things. A hustle business is just how it sounds, right? The sales you get or whatever you go out and hustle for that particular day. And the thing that's kind of unique about a hustle business is on no given day will you probably ever blow up. The whole thing will probably just never go to pot on any single given day. But also, you're never ever going to get totally rich on any one day either, are you? So these types of businesses tend to be pretty consistent, but there's limits to how much money you can actually make. And the real risks are if you're not out there hustling, there's no income coming into the door, right? So you can think of these, and I've got some examples here in a minute, but I think that'll kind of clear it up. But these are the businesses, if no one showed up, it just doesn't get done. The proprietary is an idea person. This is the person where you normally are writing or programming something. You either tend to be an artist, you tend to be something that has a copyright assigned to it. An inventor, someone who has a new product or new invention. You're trying to sell an idea, not your labor. You're not trying to sell yourself as an hourly person. You're trying to sell an idea, and you're actually trying to get that idea to take by putting it through mass amount of volume. Now, if you think about it, down below, there's three kinds of what we think founder-independent forms of business. So these are now types of companies in which are separate from you. If you leave, they still run. After you're gone, they'll still be there. So this normally means that you've got a structure bigger than yourself. It normally means you have employees in addition to your self as well. But there's something else there. And there's actually three kinds of these. You can either be a risk taker, a rule taker rather, someone who actually takes rules from the market. And I kind of call this just a normal growth company. This is the one most of us default to, by the way, without thinking about the other ones. We just say, yeah, I'm just going to get a company and grow it. So most of us, without thinking of forms of businesses, normally just go into this box and there we go. That's our aspiration. But there are other forms of business as well. Here's one, the rule breaker. This is the disruptive innovator. This business doesn't exist unless this business does. And so for those of you who've chosen this one, you've got to know that this business is the thing always coming after you, right? So it's important if you choose one of these to know that the other exists and understand the rules of the game, because the one couldn't disrupt what doesn't already exist. And we'll talk about that relationship in a minute. So some of these forms actually exist only because the others exist. And if they didn't exist, they couldn't exist. The last one's a little bit different. This is actually the rule maker. So sometimes we call this a small giant. These are companies that elect not to use growth as the only metric or the way they look at the world. They choose other values that are much more important. It tends to be an innovative culture. It tends to be a unique set of values. It tends to be a belief or philosophy that the founder actually wants to promote. So they're not just worried about size for the sake of size. They're not worried about grow or die. That's not their attitude. They're choosing really the opposite mantra of these guys. So growth company, right, is usually just going for size, geographic scale, size, existing markets with existing customers in a proven market, right? I mean, that is usually what we're looking for here. What makes this different here, the rule breaker here? This is actually going in and offering a completely different value innovation than these guys. So hence why they have to exist. So whatever the value innovation is up here, they're offering something that's completely different. So if you had to kind of start putting some single words to this and what you concentrate your time on, a hustle business, it's really all about your reputation because you are the business. Right? It's about your integrity. It's about you doing what it is you say. It's about your own persuasiveness and your ability to self-manage yourself. So if you're going to spend a lot of time, and that's where you're actually at, a founder-dependent business as a hustle person, selling your labor out, what would I do? Well, I would read the Peter Drucker article, Managing Oneself, if you can get your hands on it. It's a fantastic way of understanding that. I'd probably read the book Persuasion by Robert Cialdini, Influence. I would really think about you are the business, and nothing's more sacred than your reputation on that particular piece. That's what it's really all about. On the flip side over here, idea person, it's all about the assets, either that you own, either that you create, or you have access to. Right? So it's all about particular assets in which you've actually got. So I want to actually just compare, just for a minute, the hustle business and the proprietary asset business for a second, because a lot of people don't think about this. These are completely different risk-based entities. And the kind of risk that you're actually exposed to is actually different from each of these. So if you think about a labor person, if you're a labor person, a hustle person, right, you're selling your labor, your hourly output to somebody. And what do you know about your hourly rate, available rate? It's what? Limited, right? You only have so much time in the day that you can actually sell. So if you think about days and you thought about a curve, it would just be a straight line. It may go like this a little bit, but any day you're working, you only have a certain amount of labor. So you think of bakery, you don't get up in the morning, you don't make the rolls, there's nothing really to sell, right? You can only make so many rolls because you only have so much time. You only have so many ovens, you only have so much capacity. Dentist, every day, you go in, you grind teeth, right? There's only so many teeth you can actually grind, in a given day. You're never going to blow up in any given day, right? The business isn't going to, but also at the same time, you're never going to get rich in a single day. You will get maybe a nice net worth over time, but you're limited by the labor that you've actually got. Hair salons, right? Anything that's client-oriented tends to be, a labor person. Here, small restaurant, you're limited by the number of tables you have, right? Number of hours that you've got, and the location that you actually have. So these are hustle businesses. They tend to be the rule of the average, right? At the end of the day. No day is going to make you, rich. No day is going to totally put you out of business, right? It tends to everything just kind of fluctuates around averages. The market will actually determine how much you ultimately kind of make, and whatever you take home is just going to be determined by what the mean is. Every market's a little bit different, so the means may be different, but that's the rule. Now, an idea person, completely different. And the risks that you take are completely different as well. So here's David Sedaris. Anyone know David Sedaris? Writer, a lot on NPR, a lot. Makes millions of dollars going around just reading his books, right? Doesn't memorize them. He just reads them to people, and people show up in droves. He's a rock star of the literary world. Very, very, very funny guy. Now, an idea person, right, they're actually something that's scalable. Instead of a straight line on every day, there are certain days you make nothing. In fact, many days you make nothing. And then all of a sudden you be David Sedaris, right? The line goes like this. You wrote one book, you sold 14 million copies of it, right, overnight. So there are days which you can't blow up, and there are days which you can get rich, right? In fact, I love this. He wrote this in my friend's book, an autograph sign. It says, to Sparky, thanks for making me rich, David Sedaris, right? It's exactly right. I mean, that's a perfect example of an idea business. Here's another person in the idea business, a formerly single mother trying to make ends meet. Did pretty well for herself. Who is it? J.K. Rowling, right? Here's another great an idea-based business. Write one book, sell 14 million copies, right? It's a very different risk profile. Here's the problem with the idea person. This is why I could never get inventors to actually understand. Scale-up professions like this are only good if you're successful, right? Because the inequalities tend to be monstrous. Almost all of the rewards are inequitable, at really no fault of your own. You're either, the winner or the loser. And there tends to be winner-take-all effect in these. There'll be 30,000 new books published this year, and we saw 2 authors on that. The top 20 books will represent 80% of all the sales. The top 20 books, 80% of all the sale units that actually go out 30,000 units. So an idea, business tends to be either giants, right, or dwarves. There tends to be no in-betweens. There's no average. There are just mass inequalities. There's big and there's tiny. And there's almost nothing in between. The pie is actually divided up, in fact, and winner takes all type of mentality. So these are two different risks. So when people talk about risk in business, it depends upon the form of business that you've chosen, right? There is no one risk. There are different kinds of risk. And if you're a founder-dependent proprietor, above that line, the kind of business model you chose inherently tells you the type of risks that you're actually going to face. So those are the top. If you're thinking about the bottom, these are the ones I want to spend some time on, because these assume that most of you are going to try to grow your business, and most of you already have employees. In fact, raise your hand if you do have employees already. See, most of you are already past that threshold. You're trying to work down here in this space. So I want to spend just a minute down here and give you the ideas about exactly what these form of businesses entail, because it tells you where you should be spending time. So the first one, the rule taker, the growth company, this is all about better. Better products for better customers, right, in existing markets. It always involves size and scale in order to get costs down. So there's a lot of economies and scale and so forth. But the whole rule is just better, continuous improvement and so forth. Think about what Cummins does every day. Six Sigma, just Six Sigmas, get better, better, better. Reduce particulate matter, improve quality, just get it better. Measure it, get everything closer to the Y variable, just get better. I mean, that's what growth businesses are, and that's what they exactly have to do. That's the mantra, better. What do I need today? Better. What do I need tomorrow? Even better, right? That's the whole crux of it. Now, the rule breaker's different, right? They're not concerned about, better. They're concerned about a completely different value proposition. So you always know a disruptive innovator, a rule breaker, because they can say, yeah, well, Cummins building engines. We build warp drives, right? Completely different value proposition. Faster, cheaper, more convenient, right? So they're always about something that's different than what the existing company is actually doing. So if you know what the difference is, then chances are disruptive innovator. I'm going to show you exactly, there's actually a formula for that, and I'll show you what that is. And then the rule maker, this is about a business that, I said, eschews growth for the sake of size. They don't believe grow or die. In fact, they believe that there are other things that are much more important than just growth. And so these people believe in a very, very well-articulated and aligned philosophy, and they usually believe strongly in the company culture as their competitive advantage, a great place to work, or it may be some philosophical idea they believe so strongly in that they want that business to be wrapped around. They're not really concerned about size or scale. They're more concerned about a competitive advantage by staying actually small, believe it or not, and having control over some philosophical piece. So if you kind of look at these, taking kind of a deep dive, a rule taker, the growth company, probably no more of a quintessential author than this dude. So who is this? Who's read Michael Gerber's E-Myth book? Probably the most read book in small business. So why most businesses don't work and what to do about it. So Gerber's philosophy is pretty sound, and he just says, look, we're all technicians, we all going to do work. You guys design web pages, right? Go out and do consulting, you know the practice, constructive thinking, the practice of financial management. So we're technicians, we do something. But you also have to be a manager, which means knowing how to put the processes in place to kind of make the place work, and you have to be an entrepreneur, which means a vision, some strategic vision of where you want to take the business. So you need to be all three, the three legs of the stool, right? But the problem, Gerber says, is most of us are technicians 70%, managers 15% of the time, and visionaries 15% of the time, right? Where he says, really, if in a perfect world, you would be 1/3 of each. And so what's the solution for Gerber? For those of you who've read it, he has a very definitive solution to how you fix this. You don't work in the business, you work on the business, and there's a way to kind of trick yourself into doing that. Remember what it is?
It says that create systems and document it and make sure it's like assembly line.
Yes. So did everyone hear what Matt said? Create systems and document it so it pretty much works like an assembly line. That's precisely what he says. He says, pretend as if your business is a franchise. You're going to be like a McDonald's and you have to franchise it. Put in place all the systems and processes and standards that you actually would as if you were going to replicate this, even if you're not, right? So it puts in place a good discipline, is really what it does. So the strength of a growth company is the fact that it's easy to replicate. And it has to be because it's all about scale, right? And it's all about geographic scope, and it's all about size. So from that regard, Gerber's advice is good. So it's about processes. Put in place processes. Processes. In fact, this is basically the kicker of the book. The processes produce results, and the people manage the processes, right? That's what I think's fair, I think is a core crux of it. So I think that's pretty fundamental to a lot of growth business. A very popular book, and I think he's spot on. So you think about, here's a quintessential growth business, right? McDonald's, Starbucks, right? Starbucks, the logo, the branding's done. There's a style manual, graphics manual. They have a certain look. They have certain materials. They know exactly where everything's located. They have a same water system that's going to, pre-treat the water. They got a set menu. Every store, may look a little bit aesthetically different based on where it's located, but when you walk in almost exactly what the menu board's going to be, where the barista's going to stand, where you're going to find the counter. And the product is going to be consistently, of a very similar quality, right? So classic example of this particular one of the rule taker. And where do you take the rules from? You take it from the market, right? But it's called a rule taker because the processes are the rules, and everyone takes the rules, right? The processes are the system, and the process is the actual answer here. So Gerber says, here's the solution right out of his book. The model will be operated by people with the lowest possible skill level. Yes, I said the lowest possible skill level, because if your model depends on highly skilled people, it's going to be impossible to replicate. And this is probably the core argument of the growth business model. Does anyone see a problem with that? Keep in mind, and here's what you're going to find out, each of the three, each one of these has strengths, and each one of these has terrible weaknesses. The strength of Gerber is by putting tough processes, we get discipline, we're able to grow, we're able to go to different markets and have a very similar experience. What's the chief weakness of this model? Creativity? Turnover? What? Right. Who here says someday when I grow up, I'm going to work at McDonald's, right? Or my career objective, barista at Starbucks, right? If I can only make it there, by gosh, I've made it anywhere type of thing. They even call these mixed jobs, right? I mean, that was, almost a joke for this particular kind of industry. But you're exactly right. You're also missing something else. There's a key word in here is replicate. You put in processes so it's easy to replicate. That's good. Yeah, you do it because it's to be easy to copy. But guess what? Here's the problem, right? And Seth Godin kind of hit on this and got in a big debate with, because these are two different thought leaders at two very different parts of the spectrum. If you make your business easy to replicate through processes, someone will replicate it, right? Others, right? Because when you focus on the process piece itself, they're very easy to replicate. And if you build a business filled with rules and procedures designed to allow you to hire cheap labor, you have to produce a product without humanity, creativity, which means that you'll have lower your prices to compete, which leads to a race to the bottom. So if you think about any of these kind of business models that follow this process, what's always the criterion? Reduce price, right? Price goes down. So growth model ultimately dictates this. So the advantage of this, great systems, great processes. Huge scale, you can geographically expand the business. It's fantastic. There's rules, there's procedures. You have a much bigger employment base to draw from because it's not just highly skilled workers. You can pretty much get anyone, to come in. That's the advantage. The disadvantage to this, as we saw here, is these processes make it very easy to replicate. In fact, that's part of the problem, which brings you to the next one. So when you're in this particular kind of business, and this is why I want you to think for those of you who've chosen this model, it's a great model. Some of you have to do it because you need scope. Some of you have to do it because you need scale. And it's the right place to do. But what should you be working on in this particular model? You got to work your way up the hierarchy as the founder. And usually it starts off, just as Gerber said, you're the technician. You're working down here doing the work, right? And this is important because it creates authenticity for later on. So you're the technician. Moving up, as you kind of evolve or grow in your level, the next stage is teaching others how to do the work. This is when you get employees on, right? And you have to kind of bring them in and say, okay, so here's our code base, right? Here's how we do, here's our forms, here's how we serve customers, here's the meat counter, here's where we unlock it, You've got to bring it and teach others how to do the work. Your role changes fundamentally. But this is an important step because it's the prerequisite for leadership. Because if you can teach people to do the job, you're halfway there toward really the lessons of leadership and what leadership is really about. Next, your role as you move up the hierarchy, you then spend more of your day, more of your time as the business grows, setting the desired results, right? Setting the primary aspirations. So now you got groups of people you've taught. Your role now becomes something different. Your role now is to say, and here's what the system should produce. Here are the 3 outcomes that we've got to get, and here are the systems that are going to bring it to us. So your role changes. So you notice this is an evolving hierarchy. But in a growth business, this is your role as a founder, what you kind of got to do and where you spend your time. Then it's about managing the context, right? Let's set the values. What are the standards? We know what we want to achieve, but now we're going to actually define how we're going to get that done in a very meticulous way. What are the values? And the final piece up here, actually when you get to a point, you're actually almost co-creating vision, shared vision. You have introduced processes now that other people are bringing in the vision. The business is going so big anymore, no one person can usually bring a singular vision to it. If it's not shared vision, the whole thing kind of falls apart. So if you're in a growth business, this is your ladder you're going to have to climb. And so over the years, you'll find your role evolve. If your role is not evolving, you'll actually prohibit the business from growing. So for those of you who've chosen this particular model, or will choose this particular model, this is the work for you. And sometimes this takes years, right, to ascend this. This isn't something you're going to do. It's like, great, well, I'll have this done by June. No, it's not that kind of work. But this is usually what we see founders doing. They climb this hierarchical ladder on the growth business. Any questions about that? Does that make sense? You see why that's... So that's the evolutionary path for founders who kind of choose this, and it tells you where you spend your time. Yeah, they're already there. So let's do one more before we grab some lunch here. So let's talk a little bit about the rule breaker, because I said this one exists only because of the rule maker. So the disruptive innovator is this. This is probably the greatest practitioner of disruptive innovation. It's Clayton Christensen, who wrote the book on all the principles of disruption. And what Christensen was actually interested in is he saw business after business after business. And businesses fail for many reasons, right? But he wasn't interested in just businesses that failed. He was interested in businesses that actually were successful, well-managed, had well customers, good financial stability, and failed anyway. Because he could point to a number of examples where all of a sudden the business is going strong and all of a sudden it can go on. And so in biology, you study fruit flies with DNA. Why do you do that? Yeah, 24 to 48 hours, they're dead and you have a new generation, right? So it's a very, very quick way to look at processes. So there actually is a fruit fly equivalent in the business world, and Clayton Christensen's friend kind of turned him on to it. The fruit fly is this. Here it is being loaded onto a jet plane here on this forklift here. Anyone know what that is? Well, let me help you out by giving you the next slide, which is where it actually gets installed. Now what is it? It's part of a computer. Yeah, there, it's a hard drive. So this was the actual IBM 305 Ramet computer, 50 24-inch disk, total capacity 4 meg. Right, Amber gave me a USB here today that I put this presentation on, 16 gig in my pocket, right? So the disk drive industry was an interesting way because it had a lot of geeks in it that literally documented every manufacturer since the beginning of where the disk drive industry actually came up. So it was a ton of data for Christensen to look at. And what he was just floored about time and time and time again is that the next technology of disks, the leader never made it to the next jump, ever. Even though they had all the technological capability to do it. It's almost as if he said they didn't want to do it. In fact, that's almost exactly the answer. And so Christensen actually began to try to figure out why this was. So here's one jump, an 8-inch drive to a 5 1/4-inch drive. okay? So the 8-inch drive, more capacity, it holds more, access time, quicker, so it holds more, it's faster, and if you look at the cost per megabyte, it's way cheaper. It's $50 as compared to $200. Why in the world would anyone buy the 5? The 8 is clearly the superior technology. Oh, yeah, it's 6 pounds versus 20 pounds, and what else about it? It's 150 cubic inches versus 500 cubic inches. Now, why is that important? This was the jump from the desktop to the laptop. The size is important because it was the first time they would actually make a technology like this portable, something that you could take with you. Now, who would have thought that people would actually pay more for a megabyte than less for a megabyte? No one in the industry, obviously. So this is why almost every 8-inch drive manufacturer never made the jump to the 5. The 5s never went to the 3s. The 3s never went to flash memory. The flash memory, they never ever made it because it's totally counterintuitive. The reason why is we as customers, you and I, what we wanted, our standard that we actually judge, markets by, changed. Where we wanted size and we wanted speed, all of a sudden convenience became more important. And no one made the jump because the standards of performance actually changed. So this is what kind of Clayton Christensen found out. And this happens in every industry, whether you know it or not. It's happening in your industry right now. I mean, some of you know that. Some of you might be thinking, really, is it? It is. Trust me. So it's not just disc manufacturers, right? And we're not talking about technology, just bright, shiny things or iPods or iPads. This happens in almost anything. And when they say technology, they mean any process of transforming something into something else. That's a technology. And that's all you and I do as business people, is transform one thing into something else. So the speed of this is actually increasing as well, as we know. So Andy Grove actually asked Clayton Christensen to come in. Andy Grove's with Intel. So I want you to come in and explain your theory to my board. And the board meeting got way over time. They didn't have much time left. And they brought Christensen in and said, look, we have 15 minutes. Tell us your theory. And he told them the theory and what it meant for Intel. Basically meant Intel was toast if they didn't realize what the theory meant and actually change. So does anyone know what Intel did? They had the Pentium processor. They were at the high end. And does anyone know what strategy it ultimately saved Intel? Because it was Christensen's advice that saved them. Does anyone know what they did? Yeah, they came out with two ideas. They went to the dual, so they went up higher on the thing, but then they also went lower with, remember the product name? If you don't buy a Pentium, you get a Axiom. You get one down. Remember the name of the processor they came out with? It was cheap. It was about half as much. It all of a sudden made. Yeah, I think it was a Core, but Core. The point is they came out with they disrupted themselves by actually introducing a chip that was half the price of the other chip. It had half the capabilities too. And so all of a sudden, if you notice, there was this moment where laptops used to be $2,000 and all of a sudden they went below $1,000. That's the shift they made. So they actually woke up Intel and took this advice, and this was the advice Clayton Christensen told them. He said, what we found is disruption shows in cases of well-managed firms, good management was the most powerful reason they failed to stay on top of their industries. Because they listened to their customers, because they invested in existing technologies, they never made the jump. And he told Intel that day, what this implies at a deeper level is many of what are now widely accepted principles of good management are in fact only situationally appropriate. So if you're a better company, a growth company, and someone comes in with a disruptive technology, what I'm saying is there's no way to manage your way out of that problem. And good management will actually only complicate the problem and make it worse, right? In Intel's situation, if they would have doubled down on the Pentium, there wouldn't be an Intel today. AMD and all the other providers would have eaten their lunch. So this is disruptive technology, and many of our industries have seen it. Tim Cooney will tell you about being disrupted 2 or 3 times. The printing industry is always in a state, right, of just perpetual, disruption. And so these particular businesses look something like this. There's basically 3 kinds of technology. This is a performance measure, and this is time. And all companies that are in the growth business get better over time. And usually at some point, they actually overshoot what their customers actually want in terms of performance. It's either too costly, too much storage, too fast, and it exceeds our capacity or our willingness to pay for it. And as soon as a company gets better and better, it's called a sustaining technology, you create a vacuum in the market. One vacuum's down below, down here. Further you go up on better, all of a sudden you create this big vacuum down below. And this is actually known as a low-end disruption. You can actually think of Vanguard mutual funds. You can think of Newport Mini Mills, Dell Computer originally, Walmart. And what this is a really cheap business model, right? This makes it very hard for businesses up here who are selling a high-priced product with a lot of overhead to compete, because I come into the market with a very low overhead, right? Priced at that particular price point. It's almost impossible for these companies up here to come down and meet my demand, right? Because they'd have to totally destroy the whole organization and start over. So that's one kind of disruption, and you and I have all seen that. Here's the other kind, because this is a scary one, because this is the one you don't see. An entrepreneur comes in and actually just comes up with a product that has a completely different measure of performance than the previous measure of performance the industry has always known is better. When that happens, you've got a problem. You've actually got what they call a new market disruption, where they're actually competing as non-consumption, consumers that weren't even buying before. And the secret of the first axis up here is you think about some of these kind of groundbreaking innovations in these areas that totally changed it. This axis is normally about reliability, functionality, and better. This axis normally always competes on simplicity, convenience, customization. They bring something to the market that didn't exist before. And so this occurs over and over and over again. And this was the key. Remember our thing from Michael Gerber, processes? Part of what makes disruptive technologies possible is the fact that these processes exist with growth businesses. By their nature, processes are designed to do one thing every single time, right? Time after time. In other words, they're completely immutable to change. They don't want to change, and they don't change. So a lot of better companies always get disrupted because of their processes. They put in the processes in order to grow the company, the Michael Gerber, the first one. And what actually ultimately unearths them in the end is the fact they're following these same processes because the whole standard of value changed. So it's important. Here's an illustrative example, because that was pretty theoretical, that last slide. Here's a great example of a little company up the road called Lilly, right? Now, Lilly was amazing in pork insulin, and a lot of folks know when you have insulin because of diabetic, they actually take this from pigs. But a lot of people are actually allergic to the impurities in pig insulin. And so this pork insulin is greatly improved by Lilly. In fact, look at this, 50,000 impure parts per million in 1925, 10 parts per million in 1980. So in 20 to 30 years, they took 50,000 impurities down to 10. That's fantastic. That's what you call better, right? Every day, better. Every year, better. And what defined better? Purity. That had always been the gold standard of insulin, purity. Now, while Lilly was spending $1.2 billion trying to get rid of this last 10 parts per million, which they were by going to synthetic humulin, is the product that they invented, $1.4 billion. There are two little Danes sitting over in Scandinavia in a garage, right, thinking, I don't think it's about purity at all. I think it's about different factor, convenience. And so they actually took a subpar insulin that was even less pure than Lilly's best insulin at the time, and they put it in little pens. And the nice thing about the pens is you had a little top. You actually had a dial, so you could actually change the administration of the dosage. And you had a needle, right? So it would actually be able to think. A lot of them, you can put timers on it, so people would remind people, it's time to take it, because, timing's an extremely important issue, especially with certain types of diabetes. So you could throw this in a pocket, you could throw it in a purse, you could clip very easily in a case. It's a very, very simple thing. The irony is with the Novo pen, as it was called, is that the insulin was less pure, technically, but people didn't care. Started buying it within only 5 years. Novo, which is now Novodisc, they actually had 30% of the insulin market with little pens. Worse quality, right? But why? Why did they get 30% of the market? They compete on a completely different. So remember that other curve over here? This is classical disruption. While you're busy doing better, they're over here doing different. The key is if you are going to be a rule breaker, you know the value proposition you're breaking, you can articulate it. That's how you know you're a disruptive innovator. Here's the question. For 50 years, greater impurity was always the successful formula. So what in Lily's company history would ever cause culture-based assumptions ever to change, right? And they didn't. Only after they got disrupted. Now, they had their own pen today. You know why? They had to go and buy this little company over here, right? Now they have their own, pen. In fact, they're probably one of the leading providers of these pens. But it was an expensive lesson to put $1.4 billion into a product over here and then have to turn around and spend another $1 billion to go buy that. Expensive lesson. That's classic disruption, right? And it happens to all industries, usually over time. But that is actually kind of what the rule breaker actually looks like. So I thought this was kind of interesting. Looking for industries or categories ripe for disruption, Steve Jobs always asked, who's making products more complicated than they should be? As soon as I read that Isaacson book, it's like that's, even though he never really called it disruption, that's exactly what disruption is. Find out who are making products a lot more complicated than they need to be and introduce a new value proposition to the mix. So last three, and we'll take a eat. So here's 3 examples. Minute Clinic. How many of you are familiar with Minute Clinics, right? Started in the Target area in Minneapolis where they're headquartered. And what's unique about Minute Clinic? Help me.
Walk in, it's fast.
Yeah. And do you see a doctor? No doctor, right? Nurse practitioner, right? They have only can diagnose usually about 12, but it happens to be the 12 most commonly treated things like strep throat, ear infection, all the things that your kids get, like gangbusters all the time. No medical equipment or testing equipment, in the place. And they're usually located where? Within a big box store, within a pharmacy, right? Right next door. They can usually give you a pager. You can go shop. And when the prescription's ready, you come back. So this is called a value curve, which basically just means relative to the basis of competition as the company sees it, how they stack themselves up against, in this case, the black line's a typical doctor's office. So in Minute Clinics, their price, way below the industry. No doctors, no specialty equipment, low number of treatments, but where they decided to compete is availability, speed, right, and convenience. And you notice the curve, right? See that picture? So let's look at another one because you're going to probably see some different, some similarities here. Curves. There's an entrepreneur woman who made herself a billionaire with a very, very simple concept. It doesn't look much like your spa that you're used to, right? There's no weight room here necessarily. There's no swimming pool. There's no sauna. There's no, But who's been to a Curves? Anyone? What's pretty unique about this arrangement? Can you tell them how that works?
You move in a circle and you all rotate. You go from machine to machine.
And usually about what amount of time?
That I don't remember. Just a few minutes.
Yeah, it's a very short abbreviated amount of time, isn't it? So, kind of, that's kind of what it looks like, and they usually say, hey, you can get all the way around the circle in about 30 minutes, right here. The nice thing about this, if you look at the value curve, in terms of a traditional health club, the price point is a lot lower, but the amenities are too. Like I said, there's no swimming pool, don't ask where the sauna is, there's no racquetball court, forget it. But those are really, really, really expensive things to build anyway, right? Just take them out of the mix. A lot less workout equipment at the place. Workout time, though, is a lot lower. Instructors, they really don't pride. There's some help there, but they don't pride themselves like the big, gyms do, so you lower payroll. But encouraging environment, non-threatening same-sex environment, convenience, right? In fact, if you look at the value curve, it's almost like it's the advantage of home exercise without all the cost of a major club. If you think about it, because sometimes you just want that extra motivation of being around peers, get out of the house a little bit, right? But you don't necessarily want to pay the $200 a month for a full, suite on the LA gym. So it was a classical disruption thing that was introduced, and they're really easy, to kind of replicate. So notice the curve of the green versus the curve of the black. This is a classic disruption-based business, right? This is right up there, rule breaker. And then the last one, these are over in Japan. QB actually stands for Quick Beauty. I don't know much about the slogan, but it's just cut. That's it. Just cut. is what they actually say. Just so you know a little bit about Japanese culture, a haircut is normally a ritual. And it's normally the expectation in Japanese culture. It's an hour-long piece. I mean, it's a shave, right? It's the hot towels, it's a head massage, it's oils. It's like, cut the hair, right? So this entrepreneur has actually disrupted it based on speed. It goes against Japanese custom, but there's a huge market out here. There's a light up here you see in the upper right-hand corner. It's very important. You get a little bit better view up here. That's how long the wait is inside. So it actually goes from 0 minutes all the way up to red. So if you're busy, just fly right back. But if they have availabilities, you're instantly told where you're at here. They don't take any kind of appointments. There's no books. There's no one sitting up front. The only attendant you actually talk to is these machines right out front. They also have what they call a quick air wash system. This whole thing is designed with a big vacuum thing, so they can actually turn around this hygienically in as little as 2.5 minutes, just using a customized vac system that goes through the whole place. Again, you don't talk to an attendant. You just go up, you put your money into this little machine, and it gives you this little card. If you want the tip is actually built in. If you want to do it, it's asking you put percentage, puts on the card. You give the card to the person who cut your hair. When they get it, they turn those cards in at the end of the day to get their pay. Very simple, right? So if you think about quick beauty as compared to the average Japanese barbershop, much lower price, no reservation desk, no extra services, no range of treatments, but they're decided to compete on hygiene, time savings on waiting, time savings on the haircut, and their air wash system, which is a proprietary piece that they've got. Notice the curve. So in all cases, this rule actually breaker has 3 things. They always have a tight focus of 3 things they concentrate on, which is a convenience factor, that is not standard that's normally accepted in the market. 2, there's always a divergence. The line always looks different. In fact, this is a great exercise for any of you to kind of draw your value curve. The most telling part is what you put down here. There's no answer to that. You come up with that. That's the whole exercise. Sometimes that's very hard for people. But what are the 5 or 6 things you compete on? And then how do you actually rank relative to the competition? It's a really great exercise called a value curve. But you notice all rule breakers, right? Their value curve, completely different. And then the last thing is you could actually sum up all those 3 with a compelling tagline. The strategy could be actually given in about 3 words. So that's the what? Immutable idea. Minute Clinic, you're sick, we're quick. Right? Quick beauty, just cut. Right? And on the middle one, I don't know if we saw, did you see the one here for curves? It was good. Yeah, wow. Right? Because it's not just about physical strength, right? It's also the peer support and part of the mission. So that's actually the rule breaker. So tell you what, let's get lunch.